Imagine calling 911 demanding special forces and an airlift because your HOA master key wouldn't open a neighbor's door. That's exactly what Karen-in-Chief Agnes Periwinkle did, while my son was the dispatcher. I spent 40 years designing security systems, but nothing prepared me for the suburban warfare that ended with her felony conviction. This is the craziest HOA takedown in history, and it started with a power trip over petunias. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever heard a crazier story than what I'm about to lay on you. When our sweet retired HOA president left, Agnes Periwinkle seized power like Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Overnight, wind chimes became noise pollution, rose petals biological hazards, and her pearl-white Lexus patrolled streets like a prison transport. This particular saga culminated in her frantically demanding a special forces team and an airlift because her self-proclaimed HOA master key wouldn't grant her access to my private residence. All while my own son, bless his patient soul, was the 911 dispatcher on the other end of the line, initially trying to navigate the call with the professional equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Little did she know her meltdown wasn't just being recorded, it was being managed by someone who knew exactly what kind of hornet's nest she was stepping into. Let me tell you, the hornets were about to get very, very real for Agnes. Our previous HOA president was a kindly old gentleman named Mr. Henderson, who mostly concerned himself with the annual petunia contest and ensuring the Christmas lights weren't too garish. His departure left a power vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped Agnes Periwinkle, a woman whose primary qualification seemed to be an inexhaustible supply of righteous indignation and a belief that neighborhood covenants were sacred texts penned by archangels themselves. She was, to put it mildly, a piece of work. Her campaign consisted of going door to door, not to solicit votes, but to point out minor infractions. "Your azaleas are encroaching 1 inch onto the common path, Mr. Smith," she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension usually reserved for repeat offenders in maximum security prisons. She drove a pristine pearl-white Lexus SUV, always freshly detailed. Her outfits were expensive but joyless. Stiffly ironed blouses, sharply creased slacks, and sensible heels that clicked with alarming authority on pavement. Her hair was a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver, unyielding to wind or reason. I'm an engineer by trade, semi-retired now, but I spent 40 years designing and implementing secure access systems for various facilities, some quite sensitive. My mind naturally gravitates toward logic, regulations, and clear delineation of rights and responsibilities. When Agnes was elected, and I use that term loosely since turnout was abysmal, I figured we'd manage. I dealt with challenging personalities in corporate boardrooms. How wrong I was. The first few months were a flurry of new rules, bylaw amendments, and increasingly stringent interpretations of existing guidelines. The community newsletter, once a cheerful roundup of birthdays and bake sales, became a grim litany of violations and warnings. Her citation hammer came down weekly. Lawn gnomes were declared aesthetic terrorism. Wind chimes became acoustic anarchy. The approved exterior paint palette was narrowed to 3 equally uninspiring shades of beige. My neighbor, old Mrs. Gable, who'd lived in her house for 50 years and whose prize-winning roses were the street's highlight, received a formal citation because some petals had allegedly fallen onto the sidewalk in a disorderly fashion. It was madness, creeping, insidious madness that most people grumbled about but complied with to avoid hassle. The master key policy was unveiled about 6 months into her reign of terror. It was presented at a sparsely attended Tuesday night HOA meeting tucked away in the new business section. Agnes stood at the rickety podium beaming as if she'd solved world hunger. "For the safety and security of our community," she announced, voice resonating with self-importance, and to allow for emergency access and routine maintenance inspections as deemed necessary by the board. The HOA will be procuring a master key system for all residences. A stunned silence fell over the room. Even her usual enablers looked uneasy. Someone, I think it was Tom Henderson, a mild-mannered accountant, finally piped up. Agnes, you mean a key that can open all our front doors? She smiled patronizingly. Precisely, Mr. Henderson. For efficiency and adherence to community standards. Its use will be strictly regulated, of course. I felt a cold not form in my stomach. This wasn't just overreach. This was flagrant disregard for privacy, security, and basic property rights. I designed systems to prevent unauthorized access, not facilitate it at some self-appointed guardian's whim. I raised my hand. Miss Periwinkle, could you please cite the specific article in our covenants or any relevant state or local laws that grant the HOA authority to possess a master key to private residences? She blinked, her smile faltering for a microsecond. It's an initiative for community betterment, Mr. Davies. A proactive measure. With all due respect, proactive measures still need to be legal. Forcing homeowners to provide access to their homes without individual consent or clear, legally defined emergency sounds highly problematic. What locksmith would even agree to create such a system without individual homeowner authorizations? Her face tightened, the pearl-white Lexus of her demeanor showing its first scratch. The board has approved this, she snapped, gesturing vaguely at two other board members now intently studying their shoelaces. It's for everyone's good. She announced the master keys with the glee of a dictator issuing arrest warrants. When I cited Virginia's trespass laws, her smile didn't fade, it froze, like I'd slapped her with a gardening glove. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. This was holy war. The discussion went downhill from there. I calmly pointed out legal ramifications and security risks. What if that key was lost or stolen? She accused me of being uncooperative, disruptive, and not a team player. The motion passed, though I suspected votes were more about avoiding her wrath than genuine agreement. I went home fuming but with cold determination. This wasn't about law gnomes anymore. This was a line in the sand. I immediately researched Virginia state law regarding access rights, trespass laws, and HOA powers. Unsurprisingly, nothing supported her master key initiative. Most legal precedents leaned heavily toward protecting private dwelling sanctity. I drafted a polite but firm letter to the HOA board, citing relevant statutes and legal opinions, formally stating I would not comply with any request to provide a key to my home, nor permit unauthorized lock alterations. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. I also upgraded my home security, new deadbolts that couldn't be easily master keyed, and discrete high-resolution security cameras covering my front porch and entryway. I had a feeling things would escalate. I warned Mark, my dispatcher son, if Agnes ever tests these cameras, it'll be epic. Neither of us guessed he'd be her unwitting co-star. Just be careful, Dad, he'd said. People like that can be unpredictable when their power is challenged. He had no idea how right he was or how directly he'd be involved. The HOA's response was a curt, dismissive note stating the Master Key program was proceeding as planned. Agnes Periwinkle wasn't accustomed to being told no, and I was about to become her public enemy number one. The stage was set for a showdown. I was methodically preparing, not realizing it would play out in ways neither of us could have predicted. The weeks following my formal refusal were characterized by steady escalation of petty harassments. By challenging her authority on that significant issue, I'd painted a giant target on my back for every conceivable minor infraction. She weaponized bylaws like a scorpion tail. My meticulously kept lawn suddenly became a battleground. One week I received a violation notice because my grass was allegedly a quarter-inch too high according to some newly minted HOA ruler she'd personally calibrated. The next week brought a different notice claiming my edging wasn't crisp enough, accompanied by a blurry photograph that looked earthquake-taken. I responded to each with calm, factual letters complete with dated photographs and, for grass height, a notarized statement from my lawn care service confirming compliance. It was exhausting, like swatting persistent, buzzing flies. Agnes in her pearl-white Lexus would cruise slowly past my house, her gaze lingering too long, expression mixing disapproval, predatory anticipation. She was waiting for me to slip up, to give her an excuse for something bigger. Other neighbors were mixed. Some, like Mrs. Gable, were quietly supportive, offering whispered encouragement when Agnes wasn't looking. Mrs. Gable even started leaving anonymous solidarity notes in my mailbox. Pressed flowers, newspaper clippings about egregious HOA overreach in other states. Others, cowed by Agnes's aggressive enforcement, kept their distance, afraid of becoming her next target. The HOA board consisted of Agnes plus two others: Arthur Jenkins, a nervous man perpetually terrified of his own shadow, and Brenda Riley, Agnes's primary sycophant who nodded vigorously at everything and echoed her sentiments with alarming enthusiasm. Classic enablers, too weak or self-interested to challenge Agnes's increasingly autocratic behavior. I tried reasoning with Arthur once, catching him retrieving mail. Art, this master key idea isn't just bad, it's legally indefensible. You're exposing the HOA and yourselves to significant liability. He stammered something about Agnes having done her research and practically sprinted back inside. Logic and reason wouldn't penetrate the wall of fear and delusion Agnes had constructed. Mark would call every few days. "How's the HOA war going, Dad?" he'd ask, amusement gradually being replaced by concern. I'd fill him in on the latest absurdity. He'd sigh. "She sounds like a real piece of work. You sure you don't want to move downtown?" I'd laugh. "Never. Besides, I like my house, my garden, and frankly, Mark, it's the principle. This isn't her personal kingdom." I continued meticulously documenting everything, every notice, letter, slow drive-by. My security cameras, originally installed for the master key issue, were capturing wealth of footage, including one memorable instance where Agnes was caught measuring my mailbox height with a tape measure, face contorted in concentration. It would have been comical if it wasn't so unnerving. I also reviewed our HOA covenants and bylaws with a fine-tooth comb, cross-referencing with state and local ordinances. Knowledge is power, and I was arming myself with as much as possible. The Master Key project seemed to be inching forward despite my objections and suspected quiet unease from other residents. Rumors circulated that Agnes had found an out-of-town locksmith, someone less scrupulous or ignorant of implications, willing to undertake the work. She started sending voluntary lock inspection notices. The word voluntary was clearly a misnomer, followed by increasingly threatening letters implying dire consequences for non-compliance, including fines and hints of legal action, though on what grounds she never specified. I ignored these notices, having made my position crystal clear. This only infuriated Agnes further. The pettiness ramped up. One morning I found a small, almost imperceptible scratch on my car door. The next day my newspaper was missing. Coincidence? In context of Agnes's escalating campaign, it felt deliberately childish. I reported the scratch to police for documentation and installed another camera viewing my driveway. Neighborhood tension was palpable. You could feel it in stiff nods instead of friendly waves, hurried conversations ending abruptly when Agnes's Lexus hove into view. Classic bully holding an entire community hostage through intimidation and abuse of minor authority. I knew confrontation was inevitable. I just didn't know when or how. I made sure legal paperwork was in order, evidence meticulously cataloged, resolve unshaken. I even consulted a lawyer friend specializing in property disputes. He reviewed my documentation and Agnes's master key proposal and whistled. "She's so far out of bounds it's not even funny. If she tries to force entry or retaliate, you'll have her dead to rights. Keep those cameras rolling." That was the plan, living in slow motion siege, waiting for inevitable assault. Then one bright Tuesday morning, it happened. I was in my home office, working on a small consultancy project, when I heard the distinct, unmistakable sound of a key fumbling in my front door lock. My heart rate kicked up. The moment had arrived. I walked quietly to my front window, peering through a gap in the blinds. There she was, Agnes Periwinkle resplendent, in a canary yellow pantsuit that did her no favors, silver helmet of hair gleaming in sun. In her hand, a single shiny key attached to an oversized plastic tag labeled HOA Master, Sector 1. She was jiggling it in my deadbolt, intense concentration mixed with smug entitlement on her face. My deadbolt, of course, was a high-security, non-standard model I'd installed precisely to prevent this nonsense. Her master key, whatever its origin, was never going to open it. I could see frustration mounting as the key refused to turn. She tried it upside down, jiggled more forcefully, even gave the door a little push as if that would magically align the tumblers. My security camera was capturing every moment in glorious high definition. I almost felt a twinge of pity. Almost. But then I remembered months of harassment, stress she'd caused Mrs. Gable, the general oppression atmosphere she'd cultivated. Any pity evaporated, replaced by cold, clinical interest in how this would play out. After another minute of fruitless effort, she stepped back, huffing, and pulled out her phone. I saw her dial, lips moving angrily. I had a very good idea who she was calling. Mark was on duty at the county's 911 dispatch center that morning. This was about to get interesting. I couldn't hear her conversation, but I could imagine it. Her usually commanding voice carefully modulated between authority and feigned distress when speaking to emergency services. Mark would be recognizing the address, maybe even her voice, trying to maintain professional composure. A few minutes passed. Agnes was pacing on my porch, phone pressed to ear, gesturing emphatically. Then her demeanor shifted. She looked up at my house, back at her phone, confusion and annoyance crossing her face. This was Mark employing professional delay, asking clarifying questions, verifying details, perhaps consulting supervisors. Anything to slow her roll and subtly highlight the absurdity of calling 911 because her non-existent authority wasn't recognized by my door lock. Her pacing became more agitated. She was talking rapidly, gestures wilder. I saw her point at my door, stab a finger skyward, clutch her chest theatrically. This was escalation phase. Whatever Mark was saying wasn't giving her instant gratification. She wasn't getting immediate SWAT team deployment to enforce her will. Through my closed window, I started hearing fragments, absolutely outrageous, uncooperative, and possibly dangerous individual. I am the HOA president. I demand access. He could be doing anything in there. Serious security risk. Her voice was cracking with indignation. I had to admire Mark's restraint, keeping a straight face through this. He knew me, probably in slippers, drinking coffee, wondering if I should prune roses later. The idea of me being dangerous was frankly hilarious. But Agnes wasn't laughing. She was working herself into a full-blown Karen meltdown. Then came the kicker. I heard her practically shriek, "No, you don't understand. This man, Davies, he's unhinged. I fear for my safety. I fear for the community. He's barricaded himself in. I think I might need an airlift. Yes, an airlift. And special forces. He's really dangerous, I tell you. He could have weapons. You need to send everyone now." My jaw nearly hit the floor. An airlift? Special forces? She'd gone from thwarted busybody to casting me as villain in a Tom Clancy novel. This wasn't just HOA overreach. This was malicious, fantastical accusation to emergency services. I saw her hang up, grim triumph on her face, as if she'd single-handedly averted national crisis. She smoothed her canary yellow pantsuit, puffed out her chest, and stood expectantly like a Roman emperor awaiting victorious legions. Little did she know the legion she'd summoned based on hysterical fabrications was indeed coming, and it would be far more than she bargained for. Agnes shrieked about hostile barricades to the one person who knew I was microwaving leftovers in sweatpants. The distant thrum of helicopter grew steadily louder, resolving into unmistakable chop chop chop. Agnes, still standing sentinel on my porch, actually preened, smug smile playing on her lips. She probably imagined it was advanced scout for her special forces coming to liberate the neighborhood from dangerous, barricaded Mr. Davies. I felt strange mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. She'd really done it, escalated petty tyranny to full-scale emergency response based on utter fantasy. Through the window, I saw the first police cruiser turn onto our street, lights flashing but siren off. Respectful approach for potentially dangerous situation. Then another, and another. Within minutes, our quiet suburban cul-de-sac looked like a disaster movie scene. Two fire trucks rumbled to halt, their bulk seeming to fill the entire street. An ambulance, crew looking bewildered, parked further down. Overhead, the police chopper circled, downdraft ruffling tree leaves and severely disarraying Agnes' helmet hair. For the first time, something other than triumph crossed her face, perhaps a tiny seed of doubt that this might be excessive. I decided it was time to make my appearance. I calmly walked to my front door, unlocked the perfectly functioning deadbolt, and opened it. Agnes, dramatically pointing toward my house for a stern-looking police sergeant's benefit, actually jumped back as if I'd materialized from thin air. "There he is, officer. That's the man. He's dangerous," she shrieked, voice now laced with genuine panic as the response scale she'd invoked began dawning on her. The sergeant, tall, weary-looking with Sergeant Miller on his name tag, gave me a long appraising look, then turned back to Agnes, then to assembled emergency vehicles, then back to me. I could almost see cogs turning, highly agitated woman in yellow pantsuit claiming imminent danger versus calm, older gentleman in cardigan opening his own front door. I simply stood there, hands visible, neutral expression. "Good morning, Sergeant." Quite a commotion. "Is there something I can help you with?" Sergeant Miller held up a hand to silence Agnes, still sputtering about barricades and hostile intent. "Sir, we received a 911 call reporting a potential hostage situation, barricaded subject, possibly armed and dangerous, and a request for airlift and special assistance." The caller, this lady here, identified herself as HOA president and claimed you were refusing her lawful entry and posing significant threat. I nodded slowly. Yes, Miss Periwinkle, our HOA president. She was attempting to gain entry to my private residence using a so-called HOA master key which, as far as I'm aware, has no legal standing. When her key unsurprisingly didn't work on my high-security lock, she appears to have become somewhat agitated. I kept my tone matter-of-fact, deliberately avoiding sarcasm, though it was sorely tempting. Agnes was aghast. "It's not so-called. It's an official HOA key. He's lying. He's trying to trick you." Sergeant Miller looked at her. "Ma'am, did you actually see any weapons? Did he threaten you verbally or physically before calling 911? Agnes hesitated, eyes darting between me and the sergeant. The lie was becoming harder to sustain face-to-face with actual authority. "Well, no, not exactly. But he's very resistant, and his refusal to allow HOA inspection is deeply suspicious. He could have anything in there. He locked himself in. He's in his own home." "Ma'am," Sergeant Miller said, voice developing a distinct edge of impatience. "People are generally allowed to be in their own homes, locked or otherwise." He turned back to me. "Sir, do you have any objections to us taking a quick look around to verify there's no immediate emergency, just to satisfy procedural requirements given the call's nature?" "Not at all. Sergeant, please come in. You'll find I was just in my office working. My son Mark Davies is actually one of your dispatchers. He might have even taken the call. Perhaps you know him." At Mark's name mention, Sergeant Miller's eyebrow shot up. "Mark Davies? Yeah, good kid, sharp. So he took this call." He glanced at Agnes again, expression now one of dawning comprehension and profound irritation. The pieces were clicking. The dangerous barricaded subject was father of one of his own dispatchers. The hostage situation was a man drinking coffee in his study. The airlift request was looking like monumental waste of taxpayer money and emergency resources. While two officers did a quick professional walkthrough confirming I wasn't running secret militia training camp or holding mythical hostages, I calmly explained the situation to Sergeant Miller on my porch. I outlined Agnes' Master Key Initiative history, my formal refusal based on legal grounds, and her subsequent harassment campaign. Crucially, I said, "Sergeant, if you'll give me one moment." I went inside and returned with a tablet. This is footage from my front door security camera, timestamped from about 30 minutes ago. The video showed Agnes attempting to use her key, growing increasingly frustrated, then making the dramatic 911 call. Audio was clear enough to catch her increasingly wild claims. Sergeant Miller watched, expression growing stonier by the second. Other officers, their walkthrough complete and finding nothing amiss, gathered to watch over his shoulder. Fire crews and ambulance personnel, sensing the situation wasn't as reported, were starting to look visibly annoyed at being dragged out for obvious farce. When the video ended showing Agnes triumphantly hanging up after demanding special forces, Sergeant Miller slowly turned to her. The air crackled. Even the helicopter seemed to quiet, holding its breath. "Miss Periwinkle," he began, voice dangerously low and controlled. "Making a false police report is a serious offense. Misusing emergency services, fabricating a story that ties up multiple units, including air support, fire, and EMS, carries significant penalties. Based on what I've just seen and heard, and the complete lack of evidence supporting your claims of imminent danger, barricades, or weapons, I'm having a very hard time understanding your actions this morning." Agnes had gone from pearl white to mottled gray. The canary yellow pantsuit suddenly looked garish and absurd. But he wouldn't let me in. "It's HOA policy. I am the president," she stammered, bravado utterly deflated, replaced by dawning panic. "Ma'am," Sergeant Miller said, stepping closer, "your HOA policies do not supersede state law, nor do they give you the right to fabricate emergencies. You knowingly made false statements to a 911 dispatcher. My officer confirmed it was your voice from call recording, alleging a life-threatening situation that simply did not exist. This entire response," he gestured broadly at assembled forces, "is direct result of your false claims." He turned to one of his officers. "Officer Jones, please read Miss Agnes Periwinkle her Miranda rights. She's being placed under arrest for making a false report and misuse of emergency services." The satisfying click of handcuffs ratcheting shut was, I confess, music to my ears. Agnes Periwinkle, steward of community standards, was finally facing actual standards, the legal kind. My son, the dispatcher who had professionally handled her madness, had just set in motion events that would bring her reign to spectacular, very public end. Handcuffs were just the start. Turns out her community stewardship funded Caribbean research trips and a locksmith cousin. That master key probably meant to hide embezzlement records. The felony conviction? 5 years. Poetic justice for a tyrant who thought her reign would never end. As the police cruiser pulled away with Agnes staring blankly out the back window, canary yellow pantsuit rumpled and silver hair askew, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the cul-de-sac. Neighbors previously too intimidated to make eye contact were emerging from homes, blinking like startled meerkats, mixture of disbelief and dawning elation on their faces. Mrs. Gable actually did a little jig on her driveway. Sergeant Miller, after taking my detailed statement and copies of video evidence and HOA correspondence, shook my hand. "Mr. Davies, your son Mark is a good dispatcher. He handled that call by the book, especially once claims became extreme. She really dug her own hole here. We'll be in touch regarding charges." He also mentioned the county would likely seek to recoup unnecessary deployment costs from Agnes, which, given helicopter, multiple police units, fire trucks, and ambulance, would be substantial. That alone would be bitter pill for her to swallow, apart from criminal charges. The investigation that followed was thorough. My video evidence was Exhibit A, but Agnes' arrest triggered something larger. With her temporarily out of commission and authority shattered, other residents came forward with their own stories of overreach, harassment, and questionable decisions. Her Master Key initiative was just the tip of the iceberg. There were allegations of financial irregularities in HOA accounts, contracts awarded to friends without proper bidding, and general pattern of using the HOA as personal power base. Police, initially focused on the false 911 call, found themselves with much wider inquiry. My meticulous records, originally intended for self-protection, became valuable resource for understanding timeline and scope of Agnes' misdeeds. The two remaining board members found themselves under scrutiny. Arthur Jenkins predictably cooperated fully, likely trying to save his skin. Brenda Riley, Agnes' loyal sycophant, initially stonewalled but faced with mounting evidence and potential complicity charges, she too began singing. The charge sheet against Agnes grew. It started with making false police report and misuse of emergency services, but as financial investigation deepened, charges of embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty were added. Agnes had been systematically siphoning HOA reserve funds for years, personal expenses, lavish trips disguised as HOA research, even payments to the out-of-town locksmith who'd agreed to her master key scheme. A locksmith who turned out to be a distant cousin with shady reputation. Her attempt to access my house might have been driven by desperate need to find or silence something, or simply arrogant assertion of slipping power as residents grew discontented. The master key wasn't just about inspections. It was about control and potentially covering tracks. The sheer audacity of calling 911 with such outlandish claims was perhaps a sign of increasing desperation and detachment from reality. Mark was initially worried about professional repercussions for his call handling, but supervisors, after reviewing tapes and Sergeant Miller's report, commended him. He'd followed protocol meticulously, initially trying to de-escalate and clarify, and when Agnes' claims reached critical threshold of alleged danger, he dispatched appropriate response level based on her words. The responsibility for massive deployment and subsequent cost lay squarely with Agnes. Mark's professionalism under duress became minor legend at Dispatch Center. The guy his dad was accused of meeting an airlift by the crazy HO lady. He took it in stride, though admitted later, "Dad, when she started screaming about special forces, I knew she was toast. No one makes claims like that without expecting serious response. I just had to make sure I did my job right so she couldn't wriggle out of it." And he had. His calm adherence to procedure in face of bizarre fiction was instrumental in ensuring justice was served. Legal proceedings against Agnes dragged on for months. She hired a high-powered lawyer who tried every trick, claims of emotional distress, arguments she was acting in good faith for the community, even attempts to discredit me and other residents. But evidence was overwhelming. Video footage was irrefutable. Financial records painted clear picture of theft and deception. The sheer lunacy of her 911 call, played in court, left jury members visibly stunned, some struggling to suppress laughter at the AIRLIFT request before quickly schooling their features. I was called to testify, as were several other residents, Sergeant Miller, and even Mark, who calmly recounted 911 call details from his dispatcher perspective. Throughout the trial, Agnes maintained an air of injured innocence, expensive though less pristine outfits a stark contrast to her situation's grim reality. She seemed to believe, right until the verdict, that she was the victim, a dedicated community servant unfairly persecuted for trying to uphold standards. The jury saw it differently. They found her guilty on multiple counts: felony making false report to emergency services, elevated due to resource waste scale and nature of false immediate danger claims, plus multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. Sentencing was the final act in this suburban drama. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with reputation for being tough on white-collar crime and abuse of trust, was scathing in her summary. She spoke of profound breach of trust Agnes had committed against neighbors, taxpayers whose money she'd wasted with false alarm, and emergency services personnel she'd endangered by diverting them from potential real crises. She highlighted the calculated nature of financial crimes and arrogance inherent in the master key debacle and subsequent 911 call. When sentence was handed down, 5 years in state prison plus significant restitution to the HOA and county for emergency response costs, a gasp went through the courtroom. Agnes visibly sagged, all pretense of composure gone. Her lawyer looked crestfallen. For me, it wasn't a moment of triumph or revenge exactly. It was profound, weary relief. Justice, often slow and cumbersome, had finally been served. The 5-year sentence resulted from totality of her actions. The felony false reporting was serious enough, but combined with years of systematic embezzlement and fraud, it painted a picture of serial power and trust abuser. The 911 call was merely the catalyst that brought her entire house of cards crashing down. Agnes Periwinkle's reign ended not with a whimper, but with the clang of a prison door. The neighborhood underwent renaissance. A new HOA board was elected reasonable, community-minded individuals including, to my surprise, Mrs. Gable, who found new lease on life. Ridiculous rules were rescinded. Finances were restored to order. The atmosphere of fear and suspicion was replaced by cooperation and neighborliness. People started planting colorful flowers again. Wind chimes tinkled merrily. Lawn gnomes, in defiant celebration of kitsch, made triumphant return. My life returned to peaceful, semi-retired rhythm, though I gained certain notoriety as the guy who took down the HOA Karen. Mark continued his dispatcher career, earning promotion not long after. His reputation for calm competence further solidified. We sometimes joke about the AIRLIFT incident, but beneath humor is serious lesson about abuse of power, however petty its initial scope and importance of standing up for rights methodically and with irrefutable evidence. Agnes Periwinkle wanted a master key to our homes. Instead, her own actions provided the key that unlocked her downfall, leading to conviction and 5-year lesson in humility. And it all started because she just couldn't comprehend that some doors and some people simply won't be bullied open. So, was Agnes Periwinkle the ultimate HOA monster, or does your Karen have her beat? Unleash those horror stories below, and if your HOA president's eyeing master keys, send her this video. Anonymous, of course.